Life has a strange way of bringing things full circle. Some call it coincidence. Others call it karma. But as I stood in that hospital room, looking down at Ryan Carter, the man who had mocked me, humiliated me, and taken my wife, I knew exactly what this was: poetic justice. I never thought I'd see him again. Not in this way, at least. Years ago, he had looked down at me from his high-rise office, a smug grin on his face as he walked away with everything. He had the money, the power, and the woman who once swore she loved me. But now? Now he was lying in a hospital bed, a frail version of the man who once made me feel like I was nothing. And the best part? He had no idea who I was. Not yet, at least. Ryan's cocky smirk was still there, even as he lay in that pathetic, paper-thin hospital gown. Some people never change. Even in weakness, they cling to the illusion of control. He looked me up and down, his voice dripping with the same condescension I remembered from all those years ago. So, what? You're still a high school graduate, jobless, and sick? What a loser. I almost laughed. The irony was delicious. I took my time, letting the moment stretch, before slowly reaching into my pocket and pulling out my ID badge. Dr. Lucas Bennett, attending physician. I held it up for him to see. His face dropped. The smirk vanished. The arrogance drained from his features as his eyes flickered between my badge and my face, realization settling in. He blinked, opening his mouth like he wanted to speak. But for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. I let the silence stretch. Then, with the same smug smile he once gave me, I tucked my badge back into my pocket and leaned in slightly. I'll be your doctor for the next few weeks. This is going to be fun. He swallowed hard. Yeah, Ryan. It's my turn now. The fall of Ryan Carter. The moment I walked out of his hospital room, I let out a slow breath, letting the satisfaction settle. This wasn't just about seeing an old enemy suffer. It was about proving something to myself. For years, Ryan had been the symbol of everything I had lost. Years ago, I had been the underdog, the one who didn't have enough money, enough connections, enough status to keep the woman I loved. But now I was standing on the other side. I had worked through sleepless nights, endless exams, and grueling years of medical school. I had sacrificed everything to become Dr. Lucas Bennett. And Ryan Carter, the man who had once stolen my happiness, was now helpless, dependent on me. Oh, how the tables had turned. He still has no idea. I walked back into Ryan's room an hour later, my professional mask firmly in place. He was sitting up now, his expression carefully blank. But I knew that look. It was the same one I had worn all those years ago when I realized I had lost. So, I said, flipping through his chart, how are we feeling today? Ryan's jaw clenched. Cut the crap. What's wrong with me? I sighed, setting the clipboard down. Liver failure. His face didn't change at first, but then I saw it. The flicker of fear in his eyes. You're lying, he muttered. Why would I lie? I raised an eyebrow. Years of drinking, stress, poor lifestyle choices. It all catches up eventually. His fingers curled into the sheets. There's gotta be a way to fix it. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. There is, but it's going to take work, real work, and I don't think you're used to that. His nostrils flared. Screw you. I smirked. You already did that years ago, Ryan. How's Claire, by the way? His face paled. Bingo. Where was Claire? That was the real question. I had expected to see her sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, still believing in the fantasy that Ryan Carter was the best thing that ever happened to her. But she wasn't here. She wasn't listed as his emergency contact, either. Something had changed. And suddenly, I was curious. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. He didn't want to talk about her. That was interesting. She left, didn't she? I asked, my voice calm, almost amused. His jaw tightened, his eyes burning with resentment. That's none of your damn business. I smiled. Oh, but it is, Ryan. Because you made it my business when you took her from me. Silence stretched between us. For the first time, Ryan Carter had nothing to say. The beginning of his downfall. That night, I sat in my office, staring at my laptop, curiosity eating at me. I typed in her name. Claire Evans Carter. And what I found: divorce records. Filed a year ago. Finalized 6 months later. I leaned back in my chair, a slow realization settling in. Ryan had stolen her away, convinced her that life with him would be better. And then, he had destroyed it all himself. His arrogance, his need for power, his obsession with status. It had driven her away. And now? Now he had nothing. No wife. No business. His investment firm had collapsed last year. No power. No health. Just a hospital bed, and the man he once mocked now holding his fate in his hands. I chuckled softly to myself. Fate had a way of evening the playing field. And Ryan Carter? He was about to learn that firsthand. A few years ago, if you had asked me who my greatest enemy was, I wouldn't have hesitated. Ryan Carter. He wasn't just any man. He was the one who stole my wife, Claire. Claire and I had been married for 4 years. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were happy. We had built a life together, shared dreams, and made promises that I believed we would keep. She was my world, the person I thought would always stand by my side. Until one night changed everything. I remember it like it was yesterday. I had come home from a long shift at the hospital. I was exhausted but eager to see Claire, to tell her about the promotion I had finally received. But the moment I walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. The house was too quiet. The air was too still. And then, I saw it. Claire's suitcase, packed and sitting by the door. She stood in the living room, arms crossed over her chest, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't place. What's going on? My voice was calm, but inside, my heart was pounding. She hesitated, glancing away. Lucas, I need to tell you something. That was when the front door opened, and he walked in. Ryan Carter, tall, smug, dressed in an expensive suit. I knew Ryan from mutual acquaintances, from the occasional social gathering. He was always the loudest in the room, the most confident, the kind of man who thrived on power and dominance. And now, he was standing in my home, next to my wife. And suddenly, I understood. Claire. My voice cracked, but I refused to break. She exhaled, looking guilty. I've fallen for someone else. Ryan smirked, slipping his hands into his pockets. You'll never be enough for her, Lucas. You're just a nobody. His words sliced through me like a knife. I felt my fists clench at my sides. Every instinct in my body wanted to wipe that smug expression off his face. But I didn't. Because Claire was looking at me like I was already gone. Like I was just a past mistake she was correcting. And that hurt more than anything. Losing everything. Ryan wasn't just some man Claire had fallen for. He was everything I wasn't. Wealthy, powerful, connected. And he made sure I knew it. The divorce was brutal. Claire didn't just leave me. She humiliated me. She flaunted her new relationship with Ryan in front of everyone. The same friends we once shared suddenly sided with them. I was the loser, the failure, the man who wasn't good enough. And Ryan? He won. Or at least, that's what he thought. The turning point. After Claire left, I had 2 choices. Drown in my failure, or turn it into something greater. I chose the latter. I buried myself in my work. I studied harder, pushed myself further, took on every possible shift just to keep myself from thinking about them. The pain fueled me. I poured everything into medical school, sacrificing sleep, social life, and sanity to achieve my dream. And slowly, the bitterness faded. I stopped wondering why Claire chose him over me. I stopped replaying the moment he called me a nobody. Because in the end, it didn't matter. Because I was building something real. And they were just living a fantasy. Seeing him again. Now, standing in front of Ryan's hospital bed, I realized something. This moment had been years in the making. Ryan Carter had taken everything from me. And now, fate had put his life in my hands. I could feel his unease as he sat there, gripping the hospital sheets. He was trying to maintain control, but he knew he had none. I watched him carefully. His once sharp, confident gaze was duller now. His skin, once tanned and perfect, looked pale, almost sickly. He had aged. He had weakened. And I had only gotten stronger. So, what's the plan, Doc? He asked, forcing a smirk. You gonna give me the best treatment money can buy? I folded my arms. That depends. Do you have any money left? His smirk vanished. That's when I knew. Ryan Carter wasn't the powerful, untouchable man he used to be. He was falling apart, and I was about to find out just how much he had already lost. The truth begins to unravel. I picked up his chart, pretending to scan through it. I see Claire isn't listed as your emergency contact, I said casually. His entire body tensed. Where is she? I asked, keeping my tone light. I assumed she'd be here, holding your hand, whispering sweet reassurances. His jaw clenched. He didn't answer. I chuckled softly. Oh, I see. She's gone, isn't she? Still, no response. I pressed further. Tell me, Ryan, what happened to the perfect life you stole from me? He shot me a glare, his fingers gripping the sheets so tightly his knuckles turned white. Screw you, Lucas. I smiled. You already did, Ryan. Years ago. How's that working out for you? He exhaled sharply, looking away. And in that moment, I saw it. The first crack in his armor. I wasn't just his doctor. I was the man who had watched him take everything from me. And now, he was realizing just how much he had lost. And the best part? I hadn't lifted a finger. Fate had done all the work for me. And now, all I had to do was watch. After Claire left, I had two choices. I could spend my life wallowing in self-pity, letting bitterness consume me, proving to Ryan and Claire that they were right, that I was nothing. Or, I could become someone they would never see coming. I chose the latter. But make no mistake, it wasn't easy. I wasn't some genius prodigy. I wasn't some miracle success story who made it to the top overnight. No, I bled for this. I gave up everything. Sleep, friendships, a normal life. All to chase something greater. I needed to prove to myself that I was more than what Ryan had called me. That I wasn't a loser. That I wasn't just a nobody. So, I poured every ounce of energy into my studies. I worked late shifts at the hospital, running on caffeine and sheer willpower. While Ryan and Claire were taking extravagant vacations, sipping champagne, and flaunting their perfect life, I was buried in medical textbooks. While they were out spending money they didn't earn, I was learning how to save lives. And as the years passed, something happened. The pain faded. The betrayal stopped mattering. Because I wasn't the same man anymore. I had built something real. Something they could never take away. Becoming Dr. Lucas Bennett. The day I earned my medical degree was the day I stopped caring about the past. Ryan? Claire? They were nothing more than ghosts. I had moved forward. I had carved a place for myself in the world, surrounded by colleagues who respected me, patients who trusted me, and a career that gave me meaning. I thought I'd never have to think about them again. Until today. Until Ryan Carter walked back into my life. Helpless, sick, and completely at my mercy. Back in the present, I leaned against the counter in Ryan's hospital room, watching as he tried to keep his composure. But I could tell. He was struggling. He had spent years being in control, always being the alpha, always looking down on people like me. And now? Now he was a patient, vulnerable, completely powerless. And I was the one holding the clipboard. I was the one who would decide his treatment. You still haven't answered my question, I said, flipping through his file. He narrowed his eyes. What question? Where's Claire? I repeated, keeping my voice casual. I assume she's out shopping while you're stuck in here? Silence. Then, after a long pause, he muttered, she's gone. I raised an eyebrow. Gone? His jaw clenched, and I could see the muscles in his neck tighten. She left me. I let the words settle. Oh. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. That's surprising. You two seemed so perfect. His expression darkened. She said I was obsessed with my career, that I never cared about anything real. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. Funny, isn't it? That's exactly what she used to say about you. Now that was interesting, because in the end, Claire had traded one version of unhappiness for another. The truth about Claire. That night, as I sat in my office, I couldn't shake the thought of Claire. It wasn't because I missed her. It wasn't because I wanted her back. It was because I wanted to know the truth. So, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked her up, and what I found, divorce records, filed over a year ago. Finalized 6 months later. No new relationships. No lavish vacations. Just nothing. It seemed that after leaving me, after betting everything on Ryan Carter, she had ended up alone. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel anger. I just felt nothing. Because Claire? She was nothing but a chapter one had already closed. Facing Ryan again. The next morning, I walked into Ryan's hospital room and found him staring blankly at the ceiling. The arrogance? Gone. The smirk? Nowhere to be seen. For the first time, he looked like a man who had lost everything. You know, I said, setting his chart down, you're lucky you ended up here. If you had ignored your symptoms any longer, your liver would have completely failed. He let out a bitter chuckle. Lucky? Yeah, real lucky. So, what's the plan? I asked. He blinked. Plan? You gonna fight for your life or give up? I crossed my arms. Because from where I'm standing, you've already lost everything else. His eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen before. Regret. He hesitated before asking, You ever think about her? I met his gaze evenly. Not anymore. And for the first time, I realized I actually meant it. A new perspective. Ryan had spent years chasing power, wealth, and status. And where had it gotten him? Alone, sick, miserable. Meanwhile, I had spent years building something real. And now? Now, I had everything I ever wanted. Not the revenge I once dreamed of. Not the satisfaction of watching Ryan suffer. Just peace. And that was worth more than anything. The beginning of his redemption. I turned to leave, but Ryan's voice stopped me. Lucas. I glanced over my shoulder. Yeah. He exhaled, rubbing his face. How do you move on? For a long moment, I said nothing. Then, finally, I answered. You stop chasing the past. And with that, I walked away. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anything. I had already won. The moment Ryan saw my ID badge, the last remnants of arrogance drained from his face. His whole life, he had been the one in control. He was the man with the money, the power, the charm to manipulate people like chess pieces. But now, he was lying in a hospital bed, wearing a flimsy hospital gown, completely at my mercy. He didn't like that. His fingers clenched the sheets as if he were trying to regain some control, trying to hold onto the last shreds of his once powerful existence. You're lying, he muttered, but there was no confidence in his voice. I folded my arms. Want a second opinion? I can call another doctor, but unfortunately for you, I'm the best one here. The muscles in his jaw twitched. Ryan Carter, helpless and powerless. Who would have thought I'd ever see the day? I picked up his chart, skimming through the medical notes. I already knew his diagnosis, but I let the moment stretch, just to see him squirm. Liver failure. I said it casually, like I was discussing the weather. His fingers gripped the blanket tighter. Bullshit. I glanced at him over the top of the clipboard. Years of drinking, stress, maybe a little too much partying. It catches up with you, Ryan. His nostrils flared, and for a second, I thought he was going to argue. But instead, he looked away, staring blankly at the ceiling. Because he knew. Deep down, he knew. Ryan Carter, the man who once had everything, was now nothing more than a sick, broken patient in a hospital bed. And the irony? The man he had mocked, humiliated, and looked down upon, me, was now the one holding all the power. The weight of his situation. I walked to the counter and jotted down some notes on his file. How long do I have? His voice was quieter this time. I turned back to him. For the first time, there was something real in his expression, fear. I didn't sugarcoat it. If you don't make changes, maybe a year. If you listen to me, you might have a shot. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. I could almost see the thoughts racing through his mind. The parties, the late nights, the reckless lifestyle that he had once flaunted like a trophy. Now they were the very things killing him. And now, the one person who could save him was the same man he once tore down. Poetic, really. Where's Claire? As I continued checking his vitals, something nagged at me. Claire. Ryan and Claire had been inseparable, especially in the beginning. She had chosen him over me, left behind our marriage without a second thought. So where was she now? I flipped through his records and noticed something odd. You don't have an emergency contact listed, I said casually. Ryan didn't respond. Where's Claire? I asked, my tone light. I expected her to be here, holding your hand, maybe shedding a tear or two for her beloved husband. His jaw clenched. I smirked. There it was. She left, didn't she? Ryan exhaled sharply, his head turning slightly away. None of your damn business. Oh, but it was. Because the man who took everything from me was now completely alone. And I wanted to know exactly why. The harsh reality. That night, my curiosity got the better of me. After my shift ended, I sat in my office, fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating whether to type her name. Did I really care? Did I really want to know? Against my better judgment, I did it anyway. Claire Evans Carter. The results popped up instantly. And what I saw? Divorce records. Filed over a year ago. Finalized 6 months later. So it was true. Ryan, the man who had stolen her away, the man who had promised her a better life, had ended up just like me, alone. I clicked through some of her old social media accounts. She had deleted most of them. The polished photos of extravagant vacations, expensive gifts, and nights at 5-star restaurants? Gone. Her once perfect world had crumbled. And I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. Because Claire was no longer a part of my life. She was just another mistake in my past. Back in Ryan's room, the next morning, I walked into Ryan's hospital room, half expecting him to be in denial, still clinging to the last remnants of his arrogance. But he wasn't. Instead, he was just staring at the ceiling, looking lost. For the first time, he wasn't trying to be the alpha male, wasn't trying to act like he had everything under control. Because he didn't. So, what happens now? He asked. I crossed my arms. That depends on you. And if I don't do anything? Then you die. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. You ever think about her? He asked suddenly. I studied him. He was asking not because he cared about Claire. He was asking because he wanted to know if I had moved on. Not anymore, I said simply. And for the first time, I realized I actually meant it. Ryan nodded, exhaling slowly. I really screwed everything up, didn't I? Yeah, I said. But that doesn't mean you have to keep screwing up. He looked at me, eyes filled with something I never thought I'd see in him. Regret. And for the first time, I saw a man, not a villain. A broken, lost man who had destroyed his own life. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't beyond saving. The shift in power. Before I left the room, he called out, Lucas. I paused, glancing back. Why didn't you humiliate me? Why didn't you throw it in my face? I smirked. Because I don't need to. And I didn't. Because I had already won. Not through revenge. Not through anger. But because I had moved on. And that was the greatest victory of all. Ryan Carter had built his entire life on power, control, and status. But now, lying in a hospital bed, connected to IVs, his skin pale and his once arrogant demeanor drained, he looked nothing like the man who had once humiliated me. And yet, I wasn't satisfied. Because there was still something missing from this picture. Claire. I had expected her to be here. When I first saw Ryan's name on the patient roster, I imagined walking into his room and seeing her at his bedside, holding his hand, just as she had once held mine. I pictured the way she'd turn to me with wide, guilty eyes, the way she'd fumble for words, trying to explain why she had thrown me away for a man who was now weak and dependent. But she wasn't here. Not once in the days Ryan had been admitted had I seen her name on the visitor logs. Not once had I overheard a nurse mention a concerned wife checking on his condition. For all intents and purposes, Claire Carter was gone. And that raised a very interesting question. Where the hell was she? The questions begin. I stood by Ryan's bedside, scanning his chart while he stared at the ceiling. His condition was stable for now, but without significant lifestyle changes, he wouldn't last much longer. He had a choice to make, fight for his life, or let the years of self-destruction consume him. But that wasn't my concern at the moment. Right now, I wanted answers. So, Claire isn't listed as your emergency contact, I said, my voice casual. Ryan's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. That's strange, I continued, flipping the pages of his file. You two were inseparable. What happened? She get tired of the high life? His fingers twitched against the bedsheet. I smirked. Hit a nerve. She left, didn't she? I asked. He inhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. None of your damn business, he muttered. Oh, I think it is, I said smoothly. You see, when you stole her from me, you made it my business. You wanted me to know that you won. So, tell me, Ryan, did you win? Or did you just lose bigger than I ever did? His glare could have cut through steel, but there was something else in his eyes now. Shame. And that was more satisfying than anything I could have imagined. A little research. That night, long after my shift had ended, I sat in my office, staring at my laptop screen. I had told myself I was over this, that I didn't care. But I did. Not because I still loved Claire, not even close, but because I needed to know how the story ended. So, I did what any rational man would do. I typed her name into the search bar, and what I found: divorce records, filed over a year ago, finalized 6 months later. No new relationships, no extravagant lifestyle, no sign that she had moved on to another better man. Just nothing. The woman who had once left me for greener pastures had found out the hard way. They weren't green at all. And now, she was alone. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I didn't feel the rush of satisfaction I expected. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt empty. Because no matter what had happened, Claire was just another closed chapter in my life. And that was all I needed to know. Ryan's breaking point. The next morning, I walked into Ryan's room, coffee in hand. He was sitting up this time, staring at the wall, lost in thought. Good. Let him sit with it. Let him feel it. So, I said, taking a sip of my coffee, are you ready to tell me the truth? Ryan scoffed, shaking his head. Why do you care? He muttered. I don't, I said simply. I just enjoy watching the man who once acted like he was untouchable sit in a hospital bed with nothing left. He exhaled sharply. Fine. You want to know? Claire left because she got bored, he admitted. I raised an eyebrow. Bored? Yeah. He chuckled bitterly, said I was obsessed with work, that I cared more about my status than about her. I couldn't help but laugh. Wow, that sounds familiar. Ryan's glare was deadly, but he didn't argue, because he knew. This was exactly what she had said to me when she left. Claire hadn't left me for Ryan because he was better. She had left me because she was chasing something that didn't exist. And now, she had nothing. You spent years thinking you were better than me, I said, setting my coffee down. And now you're in the same exact place I was, alone, questioning everything, wondering if maybe, just maybe, you were the problem all along. His fingers clenched into fists. Shut up, Lucas. I smirked. No. For the first time in years, I had nothing to prove to Ryan Carter, because I had already won. The moment of truth. Before I left the room, I turned back to him. Ryan. He looked up, his eyes exhausted. You know what the difference is between us? He didn't answer. When Claire left me, I built something real, I said. You, on the other hand, you lost everything, and you've got nothing to show for it. He inhaled sharply, looking away. I took one last glance at the man who had once destroyed me. Now, he had destroyed himself. And that was all the closure I needed. Ryan Carter had spent his entire life building an image. He wasn't just rich. He was the kind of rich that made people listen when he spoke, the kind of powerful that made men envious and women eager to be by his side. But now, he was just a patient in a hospital bed, stripped of his wealth, his status, and his control. And for the first time since I had walked into this room, I could tell he knew it. He wasn't fighting back anymore. He wasn't smirking, wasn't making sarcastic jabs, because he had finally realized something. There was nothing left to fight for. The weight of reality. I stood beside his bed, arms crossed, watching him with a quiet intensity. You're awfully quiet today, Ryan, I said, flipping through his file. Not like you. He scoffed but didn't meet my eyes. I just don't have the energy to argue. Good, I said. Because arguing with me isn't going to change the reality of your situation. I could see it. The realization was hitting him in waves. It wasn't just the hospital bed or the IVs or the fact that I was standing over him, healthy and successful, while he was weak and helpless. No, it was the totality of it all. His health was failing. His career was in shambles. His marriage was over. And unlike me, who had taken my pain and turned it into something meaningful, Ryan had done the opposite. He had wasted his time. He had built nothing. And now, he was left with nothing. The breaking point. I set his chart down and pulled up a chair, sitting across from him. Let's be honest here, Ryan, I said, my tone lighter than the words themselves. How long have you known this was coming? His jaw tightened. What the hell are you talking about? Your health, I said. Your body didn't just start shutting down overnight. You ignored the symptoms. You kept pushing forward, thinking you were untouchable. He exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. I didn't think it would get this bad, he admitted. No, I said, shaking my head. You didn't care. You thought money made you invincible. You thought being Ryan Carter meant you could outrun consequences. His eyes flickered with something. Shame, maybe, but he didn't argue. Because he knew I was right. The ghosts of his past. For a long time, Ryan didn't speak. He just stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. Then, finally, he let out a bitter chuckle. You ever think about her? I didn't have to ask who her was. No, I said simply. He glanced at me, searching my expression, trying to figure out if I was lying. Not even a little? I shrugged. Why would I? Ryan scoffed. You loved her. Yeah, and she threw it away for you. Not exactly the kind of woman worth thinking about. His face twisted, and for the first time, I saw something unexpected. Regret. She really did love you, he muttered. I raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? Then why did she leave? He swallowed hard, looking down at his hands. Because I made her think I was better. The words were quiet, almost an admission, and I realized something. Ryan hadn't just taken Claire from me. He had manipulated her into leaving. She hadn't walked away because she stopped loving me. She had walked away because he had convinced her that he was the better option. And in the end, she had lost just as much as he had. The fall of a titan. I let out a breath, shaking my head. You spent your whole life taking, Ryan. Taking money. Taking power. Taking people. And now, for the first time, you don't have anything left. He exhaled sharply. Yeah, he admitted. I know. There was something almost eerie about seeing Ryan Carter, the man who had once believed he was untouchable, reduced to this. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't vindicating. It was just sad. Because now, he was finally understanding what it felt like to lose everything. And the worst part? He had done it to himself. A new perspective. You know what the difference between us is? I asked after a long moment. He looked at me warily. When you took Claire from me, I let it break me for a while. But then, I turned that pain into something better. I built something real. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. And you? I continued. You took and took and took until there was nothing left. And now, you're here, in a hospital bed, looking for someone to save you. He didn't argue. He didn't scoff. Because he knew I was right. The choice he had to make. So what now? He muttered, rubbing his face. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. That's up to you, I said. You can let this kill you, or you can fight for what's left of your life. He let out a slow, shaky breath. And if I don't fight? Then you die, Ryan, I said bluntly, and nobody's going to be there to mourn you. His fingers curled into the blanket, because that was the real truth, wasn't it? If Ryan Carter died tomorrow, who would care? Who would show up to his funeral? Who would cry for him? Claire was gone. His business was gone. His reputation was in ruins. And now, he was finally facing the consequences of the life he had built. Or rather, the life he had destroyed. The beginning of the end. I stood up, checking my watch. You've got a choice to make, Ryan, I said. But let me be clear. If you don't fight for yourself, I won't fight for you either. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. For the first time, he looked scared. Because for the first time, he wasn't in control. And for a man like Ryan Carter, that was the real nightmare. Ryan Carter had spent his entire life winning. Winning at business, winning at life, and, as he once boasted, winning at taking whatever he wanted. But now, for the first time, he had lost. And the weight of that loss was finally hitting him. I could see it in his eyes as he lay in that hospital bed, staring at nothing. The arrogant glint was gone. The smirk that used to make me want to knock his teeth in, gone. He looked small, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. And the truth was, I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. Not because I had any sympathy left for him. He deserved every ounce of karma hitting him right now. But because I had already won, long before fate decided to put him under my care. So, I said, sitting in the chair beside his bed, are you ready to be honest now? He scoffed, shaking his head. Honest about what? About how much of a mess your life has become. His jaw clenched. I don't need a damn lecture, Lucas. I smirked. You don't need a lecture, Ryan. You need a reality check. The weight of his mistakes. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Then, finally, Ryan exhaled. I already know I screwed everything up. I tilted my head, intrigued. Oh, and which part, exactly? The failed business? The drinking? The fact that the woman you left me for got tired of you just as quickly as you thought she'd get tired of me? His fingers tightened around the blanket, but he didn't snap. He just sighed, rubbing his temples. All of it, he admitted. I ruined everything. For the first time in my life, Ryan Carter wasn't fighting me. He wasn't trying to belittle me. He wasn't trying to prove his superiority. He was just tired. And that was more satisfying than any revenge I could have ever planned. The truth about Claire. You know, I said, leaning back in my chair. When Claire left, I blamed myself for a long time. Ryan looked at me then, his expression unreadable. I thought maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe if I had made more money, been more exciting, more ambitious, she wouldn't have left. I let out a short laugh. But now I realize Claire was always going to leave someone. It just happened to be me first. Ryan looked away, because deep down, he knew I was right. You don't understand, he muttered. You didn't live with her after she got what she wanted. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, she thought I was going to worship her. Thought I was going to spend every second spoiling her, making her feel like a queen. But when I kept working late, when I didn't always drop everything for her, she got bored. I finished for him. Ryan swallowed hard. Yeah, he admitted. I should have felt anger toward Claire. I should have felt resentment, but I didn't. Because at the end of the day, she had never really been mine, or his. She was chasing a life that didn't exist. And now, she was just as lost as Ryan. His moment of truth. So what now? Ryan asked, his voice quieter than before. Now, I repeated, standing up. Now, you decide whether you want to keep feeling sorry for yourself or actually do something about it. He let out a hollow laugh. And what if I don't? I shrugged. Then you die. His lips parted slightly, like he was shocked I had said it so bluntly. But it was the truth. Your liver is failing, Ryan. If you don't stop drinking, if you don't change your lifestyle, if you don't actually take your second chance seriously, then this hospital bed is going to be the last place you ever sleep. His breathing grew unsteady, not because he was angry, but because for the first time, he was really thinking about it. About what would happen if he kept doing things his way. And for a man like Ryan Carter, who had spent his whole life pretending he was immortal, that was a terrifying thought. A different kind of revenge. I should have wanted him to suffer. Years ago, I had fantasized about moments like this, about seeing him ruined, about watching his whole world collapse the way he had collapsed mine. But now that I was here, I didn't need it, because I had already moved on. And Ryan? He was the one stuck in the past now. I can help you, I said finally. He blinked, surprised. What? I'm your doctor, Ryan. If you actually fight for yourself, if you stop wallowing in self-pity and take this second chance seriously, I can help you get better. His eyes flickered with hesitation. Why the hell would you help me? I shrugged. Because I don't need to punish you. Life already did that for me. The beginning of change. For the first time, Ryan didn't have a quick response. He just sat there, processing everything. I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. I'm going to do my job, Ryan, I said. Whether you want to live or not, that's up to you. And with that, I walked out, because I had already won. Not through revenge, not through anger, but through something much better. Peace. Ryan Carter had always been a man who lived in denial. He had built an entire life around the idea that he was invincible, that money, charm, and raw arrogance could get him through anything. But now, he was just a man in a hospital bed, pale and weak, facing the one thing he had never prepared for: consequences. And the worst part? He knew it. I could see it in his eyes every time I walked into his room. The fear, the doubt, the creeping realization that he wasn't the man he thought he was. For a long time, Ryan had convinced himself that he had one. He had stolen my wife. He had built an empire. He had everything. But now, I was standing tall while he lay in a hospital bed, stripped of everything he once flaunted. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Facing the truth. I walked into his room that morning, sipping my coffee, feeling lighter than I had in years. Ryan was sitting up now, propped against his pillows, staring blankly at the wall. "Morning," I greeted, setting his file on the table beside him. "You always this cheerful," he muttered, barely looking at me. "You always this miserable?" I shot back. He snorted, shaking his head. "Fair enough." I flipped open his chart, glancing over his vitals. "Liver function is still poor, but stable. Your body's holding on, but it won't last forever if you don't make changes." Ryan sighed heavily. "You keep saying that," he muttered. "Because it's true." He rubbed his face, his expression dark. "I don't even know where to start." That was the most honest thing he had said so far. And for the first time, I saw something in Ryan I had never seen before. Not arrogance, not bravado, but a man who was finally realizing just how much he had lost. A moment of honesty. "So, what happens now?" he asked after a long pause. "That depends on you," I said, pulling up a chair. "And if I don't fight for it? Then you die." Ryan swallowed hard. "It's really that simple?" "Yeah," I said, leaning back. "You're not 25 anymore, Ryan. You can't drink yourself into oblivion and expect your body to recover. You spent years treating yourself like you were invincible, and now you're paying the price." His fingers clenched around the blanket. "I never thought it would end up like this," he admitted. "No one ever does." Ryan looked at me, something haunted in his gaze. "I had everything, Lucas. And you threw it away." He inhaled sharply, looking down. "I didn't mean to." I let out a quiet laugh. "Yeah? You sure about that? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were always heading toward this moment. You just never thought it would actually happen." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue, because he knew I was right. "The truth about Claire. You ever talk to her?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "Who?" "Claire." I exhaled, rubbing my jaw. "No," I said. "I haven't spoken to her since she left." Ryan let out a dry chuckle. "Probably for the best." I tilted my head. "And why is that?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Because she never really knew what she wanted." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Ryan ran a hand through his thinning hair, exhaling. "She left you because she thought she wanted something better. And then, when she got me, she realized I wasn't what she wanted either. She kept chasing something that didn't exist." I let that sink in. I had spent years thinking I wasn't good enough for Claire. Years believing that I had failed her in some way, that maybe if I had been more successful, more ambitious, more exciting, she wouldn't have left. But now, I realized it was never about me. Claire had always been searching for something she couldn't find. And in the process, she had lost everything. Ryan's breaking point. Ryan let out a slow breath. "I don't want to die like this, Lucas." I looked at him carefully. "Then don't." "It's not that easy," he muttered. "It is," I countered. "You just have to decide if you want to live more than you want to keep pretending none of this is your fault." He stared at me for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. "Okay." It was just one word, but it meant everything. Because for the first time since he had walked into my life and torn it apart, Ryan Carter was finally taking responsibility. A different kind of closure. I stood up, tucking his file under my arm. "You've got a long road ahead of you," I said. "Yeah, but if you actually do the work, you might have a shot." He nodded, exhaling slowly. "Lucas," he called out as I reached the door. I turned. "Why are you helping me?" I studied him for a moment before answering. "Because I don't need to punish you, Ryan," I said. "You already did that to yourself." His eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing, because he knew it was true. And as I walked out of that room, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about making him suffer. This was about moving on. And for the first time in years, I truly had. For the first time in my life, I wasn't angry at Ryan Carter. Not because I had forgotten what he had done. Not because I had forgiven him, but because I no longer needed to be. For years, he had been the villain in my story. The man who took my wife, humiliated me, and made me feel like I was nothing. But now, he wasn't powerful. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't untouchable. Now, he was just a man who had destroyed his own life. And standing here, looking down at him in that hospital bed, I realized something. I didn't need revenge, because I had already won. The final choice. Ryan was different today. There was no sarcasm, no arrogance, just acceptance. "So, what happens next?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "That's up to you," I said, setting his chart down. He let out a slow breath. "What do I need to do?" I pulled up a chair, leveling him with a serious look. "First, you stop drinking. Completely. No one last drink. No excuses. Second, you actually take care of yourself. Medication, diet, everything. If you don't, you won't last another year." He swallowed hard, nodding. "And if I do all of that? Then you might get another chance at life." Ryan looked away, lost in thought. For years, he had acted like he was invincible. He had spent his life making sure he was the one in control. But now, for the first time, he wasn't in charge. And he hated it. The fall of a king. "You know what the worst part is?" Ryan muttered after a long pause. "What?" "I don't have anyone left." I studied him, waiting for him to continue. "Claire left. My friends? They were only around because of my money. The business is gone. And now I'm sitting in this hospital bed, realizing that if I died tomorrow, no one would care." I nodded slowly. "That's what happens when you build a life around the wrong things, Ryan." He laughed bitterly. "You sound like a damn therapist." "Maybe. But tell me I'm wrong." He didn't. Because he couldn't. A life he didn't want. Ryan sighed, rubbing his face. "You know, when I was younger, I thought success would make me happy. I thought that if I had more money, more power, more everything, I'd feel complete." "And did you?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I just kept wanting more. And by the time I realized it wasn't enough, I had already lost everything that mattered." I leaned back in my chair. "So, what now?" He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "I don't know." "Figure it out," I said. "Because this isn't living, Ryan. It's just waiting to die." The last apology. "Lucas," he said suddenly, his voice quieter. "Yeah." He hesitated, then exhaled. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between us. For years, I had imagined this moment, Ryan Carter admitting he was wrong. But now that it was here, it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. "For what, exactly?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "For everything. For Claire. For what I said. For thinking I was better than you." I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I didn't need an apology. Not anymore. "I appreciate that, Ryan," I said finally. And I did. Not because it changed anything, but because he meant it. And that was enough. The road ahead. I stood up, grabbing his chart. "You've got a long way to go," I told him. "I know. But if you actually try, if you stop blaming everyone else and take responsibility." I met his gaze. "Then maybe, just maybe, you'll get a second chance." He nodded slowly. "Thanks, Lucas." I gave him a small nod before heading to the door. "Don't thank me yet," I called over my shoulder. "You're the one who has to do the work." I didn't wait for a response, because for the first time in years, I didn't need anything from Ryan Carter. Not closure, not revenge, nothing. And that was the best feeling in the world.